And now on Sunday, Ted Cruz went on Meet the Press to explain why he's doing what he's doing to fight against Obama's appointments to replace the Supreme Court justice, or the Supreme Court seat left by Justice Scalia. So what he wants to do is, during this interview, he's going to talk to Chuck Todd, and Chuck Todd's going to ask him whether or not the Senate should actually do its job. You know, because Ted Cruz is actually a member of the Senate, and allow the legal process of appointing a Supreme Court justice to go forward. Let's take a look at that and then look at his response.
Let me ask you, does the United States Senate have an obligation to at least consider a nomination that President Obama puts forward? I understand that you guys don't want it and you would prefer to let the election, but doesn't the United States Senate have an obligation to at least go through the process and have an up or down vote?
Not remotely.
Why?
It has been 80 years since a Supreme Court vacancy was nominated and confirmed in an election year. There is a long tradition that you don't do this in an election year. And what this means, Chuck, is we ought to make the 2016 election a referendum on the Supreme Court. I cannot wait to stand on that debate stage with Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders and talk about what the Supreme Court will look at like depending on who wins. If Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders wins, or for that matter, if Donald Trump wins, whose record is indistinguishable from them on a great many issues, then we will see the Second Amendment written out of the Constitution. Another thing we'll see, and this is very relevant for conservatives in South Carolina, if Donald Trump is the nominee or if Hillary Clinton is the president, we will see unlimited abortion on demand throughout this country, partial birth abortion, taxpayer funding, no parental notification, and we'll also see our religious liberty torn down,
but I want to go back
basic
to the
rights.
I want to go back to.
Look at all the terrible things he says it's going to happen if we get a liberal, supposed liberal on the Supreme Court. You know, on that last part, go make a case to the people, right? Well, you know, if that's how you feel, if you want unlimited abortion on demand, then you got to go to the people, and you got to ask them. You idiot. We already did ask the people. In fact, we made the case twice and won twice. First in 2008 and then in 2012. And let's be honest, we'll probably do it again in 2016. Let's just be honest about that. I mean, come on, right? Nothing that you've said in that clip makes any amount of sense at all. And look, people get after Marco Rubio for his canned responses and bullshit talking points, right? But in some ways, Ted Cruz, he's actually much worse. You see, this is a talking point, but it's also so patently untrue, yet delivered with a level of smugness that is beyond the tolerable limits of most human beings. Just so smug. And so now, after he said all this bullshit, I now have the unenviable task of unpacking this weapons-grade stupid into its component parts and then destroying them piece by piece. All right, so let's go to abortion, right? Abortion on demand, partial birth abortion, funding of abortion. You realize that we don't do any of that, right? First of all, there's a ban on partial birth abortion. And also, there's no such thing as abortion on demand, right? There's just nothing. It's not there. There's also limits. As I said, there's limits on partial birth abortion. There's the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment stipulates that no federal money can go to funding abortion. None. The money that goes to Planned Parenthood, $0 of it goes to abortions. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. This is a personal decision. Abortion that should not have the government get involved. But of course, Ted Cruz wants to literally stand in between you and your doctor and wag his finger at you. No, can't do that. No, you can't do that. You don't have any bodily autonomy. Not around me. It's bullshit. He's going to tell you that you don't have control over your body. But now he wraps that up in partial birth abortion, abortion on demand. It's ridiculous. Even late-term abortion, right? You realize that really only rarely happens, and it happens because it's a danger to both the mother and the fetus. That makes sense. And most Americans, when you ask them about that, they'll be like, yeah, well, obviously the health of the mother is very important. If that's going to kill the mother, then obviously what can you do? And if that child's probably not going to live anyway, you might as well just not you spare that fetus, that baby, a very short lifetime filled with immense pain and suffering, as well as the mother. But no, Ted Cruz doesn't understand, doesn't agree with any of that nuance. I'm not surprised, right? When it comes down to it, there's a difference between being pro-life in practice and being pro-forced birth, as well as forcing your beliefs on everyone else. And unfortunately, that's what Ted Cruz does. And that, of course, takes me to the topic of religious liberty. Now, Ted Cruz, in that clip, he said, well, they're going to get rid of religious liberty. They're going to roll it back, right? No, Ted Cruz doesn't believe in religious liberty. You see, he wants everyone to be an evangelical Christian just like him. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being a Christian or even being an evangelical Christian, right? However, what Ted Cruz wants to do is turn the government into a giant church. That church that gets to control what God you worship and how you worship and what you do with your life. That is not religious freedom in any respect. Now, for the evidence for this, we go to his father, Rafael Cruz. Right? It's Ted's father, who's also a pastor. Now, Rafael Cruz has actually given sermons that God would anoint Christian kings to preside over an end-time transfer of wealth. Oh my God, dreaded socialism, right? Now, that transfer of wealth, that socialism, actually is supposed to come from the wicked and go to the righteous. Oh, that makes it okay then, right? Now, after one such sermon, a man named Larry Hutch, who is an unknown pastor from New Beginnings, right? I don't know what that is. I'm assuming it's a church, an evangelical church, right? So after that, Larry Hutch claimed Cruz's recent election to the Senate was a sign that Cruz was anointed to be that king. Now, remember, we're talking about kings here. And what's one thing that I always hear right-wingers say about Obama? Well, he's a dictator, he's a king, King Barry. Well, here's King Ted. And you say nothing about that? Kind of funny. Anyway, so now according to his father and Hutch, Ted Cruz has been anointed by God to help Christians, quote, go to the marketplace and occupy the land and take dominion over it. This, quote, end-time transfer of wealth is will apparently relieve Christians of all financial woes. Oh, good for them, right? And allow true believers to ascend to positions of political and cultural power in which they can build a Christian civilization. You see, that kind of ties into the movement from the evangelical right. I forget the name of it. Prosperity, it was a prosperity gospel, I think, where the richer you are, well, that just means you're more anointed by God. It doesn't matter how much money you got or how you get it, whether or not you're stepping on orphans and stealing pocket change from them, or screwing people over, or destroying the environment. Well, if you're rich, that's because God wants you to be rich. Oh, you want to crash the economy? Okay, and you get rich off of it? Well, it's okay, because God wanted you to do that. If you're rich, you're closer to God, you're more anointed. Now, nothing is more unchristian than that. Remember, Jesus literally took a whip to the bankers. He did not like wealth. But somehow this prosperity gospel got intertwined with right-wing politics, and as a result, you have Ted Cruz. Scary. Scary, scary. Now, apparently, when this Christian nation is in place, supposedly, Jesus is supposed to return. And also, when Jesus comes back, as a side effect, most of the Jews die, except for the ones that get converted. So people who are supporters of Israel, you might want to be scared of Ted Cruz. All right. Now, their whole beliefs, right? Raphael, Ted, and Larry Hutch preach a brand of evangelical theory called the Seven Mountains, Dominionism, right? They believe Christians must take dominion over the seven aspects of culture. Those are as follows: family, religion, education, media, entertainment, business, and government. Now, the name of the movement actually comes from Isaiah 2:2. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains. Now, just a second there. Isaiah 2:2. So I'm just making sure I don't pull a 2 Corinthians here. Okay. But 2 Corinthians walk into a bar, right? And they hang out with Isaiah twice. Oh, anyway. Let's continue with this, right? I'm having too much fun. So when it comes to Ted Cruz, he is not for religious freedom. He is for Dominionism, which is actually very dangerous. Now, here's a question. Even if this sounds pretty awesome to you, if you're an evangelical and you're like, yeah, Dominion, I love it, right? Christian government, fantastic. Well, it doesn't specify which brand. I mean, is it Catholicism? Is it Protestantism? Is it Lutheranism, right? What about Seventh-day Adventism? Anybody else who sees this should be asking that question, even if you're a Christian and think, Dominionism. What brand of Christianity will rule them all? Which one is the one ring, right? Which one does Frodo have to take to take to the mountain, to destroy, right? Which one will rule you all? Remember, there's a lot of Christians that can't agree on small, tiny things. That's why you have all these different sects of Christianity. So which one rules you? It turns out you might have a super unpopular one, like Calvinism, which is terrible, right? So that's the question you need to ask when you think about Dominionism. What do you want having dominion over you? You think yours is going to be on top? I mean, if it is, lucky you. But if you're one of the other ones, well, you might not be so lucky. You might not like what you get. And that's the thing. For the people calling for Christian government, be careful what you wish for. You might get it, and you might not like it. All right. Now, moving on. Let's go to the Second Amendment, right? The Second Amendment. You realize that's not going away unless there's another amendment to undo that amendment, right? That's kind of how it works. And people who are scared about that, you got to understand that it's a very difficult process to overturn an amendment. I mean, there's been very, very few instances of doing that. Prohibition was one of them, and then the one to overturn prohibition. That was very difficult to get. It's possible, but it's very, very hard, especially now. Especially since you have guns, right? With the gun culture in America, that kind of would never happen. Even if you had 9 liberal Supreme Court justices, if you had a packed court, still would never happen. Because once again, the whole idea of the court, of the Supreme Court, is to see whether or not and determine whether or not laws will pass constitutional muster, not make laws. Now, if you ask Mike Huckabee, he has no idea what the fuck's going on. That's why he says, well, the Supreme Court's making law with Obergefell. No, they didn't. They determined under the 14th Amendment, under the Constitution, that gay people have just as much rights as straight people. They have no idea how this process works. It's a very complicated process, and there are things that I don't understand about it. But there's no obstacle in learning. It just takes time and effort, which, of course, Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, a lot of other Republicans have no interest in doing. Or maybe they know a lot about it, and that allows them to bullshit about it. Playing politics, right? So, look, at the end of the day, this whole statement was nothing more than a ton of fear-mongering bullshit tucked into one smarmy little package. Ted Cruz is a political extremist. And look, the worst thing Trump could have done is to make this guy look legitimate. But as I said, at the end of the day, Ted Cruz is far, far more dangerous than Trump could ever be. I've said it before. Beware the snake in the grass. Beware of Ted Cruz.